Hello everybody, and welcome to the channel. I'm sure everybody here knows that Star Wars has been on a bit of a decline lately. I mean, the last good Star Wars show that we've had was Andor, and that was either 2021 or 2022, I can't really remember, which doesn't seem that long of a wait, but considering the amount of Star Wars projects that they put out since, it's a bit of a long wait. They put out like 6 seasons worth of content since then, 3 of which have been live action, and we'll just go off the live action ones for now. The 3 live action projects that we've gotten since then have been The Mandalorian Season 3, which massive decline from the first 2 seasons, like big dip in quality between the first 2. The other one was Ahsoka, which I think was okay. It wasn't particularly amazing. It wasn't awful either, but I do think it could have been way better than what we got. It had a lot of wasted potential, in my opinion. And then there's The Acolyte. Yeah. So the quality has not been super heavy hitting lately. And so when Skeleton Crew got announced, I can't say I was jumping for joy. Between the track record of stuff that we've gotten and just overall the concept just not seeming that entertaining to me. So, if you don't know, Skeleton Crew was, at least the way Lucasfilm advertised it, and it actually is pretty accurate, is that Skeleton Crew is just the Goonies in space. Now, I'll admit, I do like the Goonies. I think the Goonies is pretty good. It's a fun little, just a fun little movie. It's nothing phenomenal, but I think it's decent. It's not bad. So my expectations for Skeleton Crew were not particularly high because even though I do like the Goonies, that also means Skeleton Crew was, like the Goonies, gonna have a cast that mostly consisted of children. Now, I'm sure everyone knows this. The child actors are very 50-50. Actually, I'd say more like 75-25. In the fact that most of the time, they're not that great. They're pretty bad a lot of the time, even in Star Wars. I mean, look at Anakin in The Phantom Menace.
I've been working on that thing for years.
It's never gonna run.
Come on, let's go and play ball. Keep racing, Annie. You're gonna be Bug Squad.
So, it could have been pretty bad. Even if these actors were good, considering the writing quality of the past few Star Wars shows, I can't imagine, even if these actors were good, they probably couldn't execute the dialogue pretty well, because, there's a lot. Look at the sequel trilogy. There's a lot of terrible lines in there, and even the actors who were actually pretty good could not save those lines.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
So even if these poor kids actually were good at their jobs, there was a good chance that they could not sell the lines that they were actually going to say. It was probably going to be embarrassingly bad. So with all those concerns, I'll admit I did not care much to watch this show. Now, I'll let you know, this was a moment in history for me. I have been a bit of a slave to Star Wars for who knows how long. I've watched pretty much every Star Wars show day one it dropped. Acolyte, I watched that day one. Book of Boba, I watched that day one. So all of these shows, I watched day one. The only canon Star Wars show that I didn't watch was, I think, Star Wars Resistance, but I think only 10 people did watch that show, and I'm not one of the brave few 10 people that did watch it. So overall, it did finally come out, and you know what? I didn't watch it. I sat back, saw that it came out, and I was like, that dropped, and then didn't watch it. And you know what? I didn't really hear much about it either when it came out. Not like Acolyte, where it was just universal hate. No universal praise either. It was radio silent. It was pretty radio silent when it actually did come out. I'd say it wasn't until a few weeks later that I saw some little hints and glimpses of people here and there that was saying it was pretty good. At first, I kind of took it with a grain of salt because I even saw people saying Acolyte was pretty good, which it wasn't. But I saw people saying, hey, Skeleton Crew is actually not bad. And you know what? Not only is it not bad, I'd say it's up there. It's one of the best Star Wars shows we've ever had. So eventually, you know what? I was like, fine. If there's this many people saying that it's decent, at least, I will give it a try, see how it is. So when I watched it, I think it was about 4 episodes into it. So it's been 2-3 weeks after it came out, something like that. And I gave it a try. And you know what? Shockingly, the show was actually pretty good. I was stunned. This was a moment in history. A show that I thought was going to be extremely mediocre, a Star Wars show no less, was actually not bad. I was pleasantly surprised. So, quick plot synopsis here is that Skeleton Crew is about these 4 kids who are living on their very peaceful planet. It's very suburban. It's very just pretty normal, and they get bored. At least one of them does. He craves adventure, and he starts exploring his planet, and he finds an ancient, crashed ship on their planet. And then he and these 3 other kids that he's found the ship with accidentally activate it, and it just launches them into space. And the entire show is about these kids trying to get back home, which is more difficult than you would imagine, given the certain twist that happens, which I'll absolutely get into. So one thing I'll go ahead and establish right now, this is less of a review in terms of recommendations, more just a show to just state my opinions over. If you're wondering if the show is actually worth watching, I'd say if you're a Star Wars fan, absolutely. I think it is a nice breath of fresh air. I think it is a great change of pace. And if I had to give it a score out of 10, I'd probably give it a 7 or an 8, somewhere in that range. If you're just looking for good television, I don't really know how much you like it. I think partially how much I enjoy this is partially because I'm just a big Star Wars fan. I've been disappointed many times, so I'm just shocked to see something that's actually decent. If you're just here to see if it's worth a recommendation, I'd say yes, and then you can go ahead and log off because I'm going to be going into spoilers. But if you either A, have already watched it, or B, just don't really care, stick around. So let's go over the characters of this show. So first off, there are the 4 main kids. We've got Wim, who's kind of the adventurous one. He's the one that puts them onto this journey, and he's the one that kind of wants to go out and do all these things and see the stuff, and he's the one that gets them all in trouble. There's Neil, who is Wim's best friend, and he's kind of shy. He's a bit reserved, but he's also probably, I'd say, the kindest of the 4. He's genuinely the one that's just thinking the most about everybody else's well-being. Then there's Fern, who's kind of the stubborn one, the one who just really wants everything to go out her way, and is the one who's always, trying to be the leader. She wants to be the boss at all times. And then there is AB, who, I'll be honest, there's really not much to her. She's smart, I guess. That's really about it. There's really nothing else to her. She's got the weird technological thing on her head. That's about it. So the main concern, or one of the main concerns I had about this show when I started watching it, was that, like I said before, I was not prepared for the child cast. I was very concerned they were going to be just complete garbage in this. I had next to little to no hope for these kids, in the slightest. I was not expecting them to be good. Now, luckily, they're actually pretty good. I actually like them a lot in this show. I think they're pretty charming. So, first off, having a child cast be the leaders of a show in the Star Wars universe actually works pretty well, because that kind of spirit of adventure that Star Wars is known for, especially in the original trilogy, really comes to shine here. It does a really good job of capturing that kind of imagination and just overall just fun that Star Wars is just kind of known for. And I think having these 4 kids just kind of at the forefront of that and seeing it for themselves definitely, I think, enhances the experience. And also just in general, the child actors, they're not bad. I'm not going to say they're Oscar winning by any means, but I do think they are pretty good, and they definitely get the job done. See, just in general, they act like kids. And I think that's good enough. It's not like Phantom Menace, the clip I showed earlier of what George Lucas apparently, I guess, thought kids acted like. No, these kids actually act like kids, and that includes a lot of pointless bickering at each other. A lot of, I want to do this, not instead of you, but in reality, it doesn't really matter that much. And just in general, whole pointless bickering thing also just kind of brings me back to this point here, is that Skeleton Crew, I actually think, is one of the funnier Star Wars shows. I mean, it's not I wouldn't say it's hilarious by any means. At its funniest, I think it's just more of a heavy excel at the nose kind of funny, and not a laugh out loud funny. In terms of comedy in Star Wars, though, nothing's ever gonna top the 2 stormtroopers from The Mandalorian. It peaked there.
Everything's fine. What is that? I don't know, it's a pet or something. A pet?
But yeah, it could put a grin on my face every once in a while, and maybe like a little slight chuckle. And I think most of the comedy is just from the kids acting like kids, and from the pointless yelling at each other to this somewhat stupid imagination at times. And yeah, just in general, it just captures the thing that sometimes kids can act pretty dumb, and sometimes that's just pretty funny. I will say, though, even though it captures the idea that kids can also act dumb, it also treats them, I think, with a decent amount of respect, too. It's like, yeah, they can be a little silly, but they're not, like, extremely stupid. They can think for themselves most of the time, and I think this also does a good job of being like, yeah, they're not always the brightest, but when something needs to get done, they can usually figure it out and figure out what exactly they need to do. The balance between childlike ignorance and actual just clever thinking, I think, is most of the time pretty balanced. There are some problems with it where I think they're treated a little too stupid or a little too smart at times. The too stupid one, I'm going to use Wim as the example here. There's some you can get away with. So, for example, Wim pressing the giant glowing red button launches them into space, like him clicking that. Obviously, he knows that's a bad idea. Obviously, he knows that's kind of stupid, but he clicks it anyway, because he's like, I want to see what this button does. And honestly, who could blame him? That is a time when I think a little childlike stupidity actually works. Shoot, I know grown adults who would press this button. I might press this button, if I'm being honest here. Like, I would want to know what the button does. I mean, I know it's probably not a good idea to click the button that's just glowing on an ancient ship that I just found. But you know what? I'm curious. I want to know what it does. And so I'd click it too. That, I think, stupidity in a kid, when it's applied to the actual plot, I think is valid. But there are some other times where I'm just like, yeah, I think that's pushing it a little bit. Like the time towards the end of the show, Wim just charges. They're trying to take back the ship, and Wim just full charges a group of, just grown people, grown pirates with weapons in an effort to capture the ship. And it doesn't go as well as he planned. He doesn't get very far, but it is very much of like, what were you thinking? How do you think that was gonna go? I get you're a kid, but I think you're smarter than this. It's like, it's pretty 50-50 at times. And also, going back to the button thing, this isn't really related to the characters at all, but like, he clicks the button, right, that does launch them into space. And he says that towards the end of the show. So it's like kind of a reveal, because he didn't tell him he clicked it. He blames that the ship taking off was its own thing, that he wasn't the one who launched it. And then towards the end of the show, he's just like, yeah, I should have never clicked that button and launched us into space. And all the other kids around him is just like, you know what, I'm glad you did, because we had a great adventure. I feel like this should have been a bigger reveal. Wim just casually drops the fact that he is the one who caused all of this, and the other kids just don't really care. Unless I blacked out and he said he clicked it before this point, I feel like this would have been a bigger reveal. I feel like this might have caused more drama. But I guess a counter argument would be that they all pretty much already knew that Wim clicked the button. Like, even though he said he didn't, I think the other kids were probably like, yeah, he definitely clicked that. Which, that might be true, but also, if that were true, I feel like they would have mentioned it to Wim in that case. I don't know, it's not that big of a deal, but it is a bit of a complaint. I feel like that should have been a bigger deal than it was. So, the kids are fun. I think they work well in this type of story. But I will admit, there are some times when they don't have much individual arcs, I guess you could say, which I guess they don't really need, but at the same time, they kind of do, but they're arcs that begin and end in the same episode. Like, they just don't really go anywhere. For example, I think it's episode 6. In this episode, they're trying to get back to a ship. They just escaped, and they're trying to get back to the ship, and the ship is at the top of this mountain. And Fern and KB kind of get in a little bit of a scuffle, and Fern is like, hey, we need to start climbing this mountain so we can get to the ship. And KB is like, no. And she doesn't explain why. She just is like, you know what, I don't think that's a good idea. So I'm just going to go with Wim. And this was also kind of a stupid thing. Wim was like, hey, we should follow these junk crabs. They'll help us. I don't know what the thought process for that one was either, but at the time, I would have sided with him. Because Fern wanted to scale this massive mountain. And I was like, that's stupid, y'all are gonna die. But then it turns out there was a ladder. And I was like, oh, okay, never mind. That was a much better idea. But anyway, they split up. Wim and KB go together, and then Fern and Neil got to get together. But KB reveals that the reason she disagreed with Fern was because she couldn't climb that mountain because she was worried that her, circuits, the stuff that's on her head would, freeze up, and she couldn't do it, which they end up doing anyway, so. But I guess it's probably a good thing she didn't do that while climbing a mountain. But the whole point of it was, KB saying that, hey, Fern's gotta know she can't expect me to do all the stuff that she can do. She needs to, be a better person or a leader, I guess, and be more accepting to other people's flaws. Which, that's a decent little arc there, but the way it gets resolved, I think just doesn't really make much sense. First off, the whole Fern expecting them to do whatever she wants. I mean, yeah, she's been a stubborn leader this entire time, but also to this degree, expecting people to do something that they legit can't do, I don't think was really established before this episode. And then also, it gets resolved pretty abruptly. So, I guess the moment of realization for Fern is that when she's climbing the mountain with Neil's behind her, and Neil's like, hey, I can't do this because there's too much space between the ladders, and I'm short, so I can't climb it very well. And she hands him down a rope, and he just ties it around him. And they just continue to climb up the mountain. And I was just like, okay, that was it. I mean, Fern didn't really say much in that scene. And then when her and KB meet up, KB finally explicitly says, what the problem was. She didn't straight up say what it was earlier. And Fern was just like, yeah, I'm sorry. You're like my best friend. It's all good. And I'm like, what was the resolution there, really? First off, did Fern even know what the problem was? Because KB didn't explain it to her until the very end. And then even when she did, Fern was like, I guess you're expected to know that Fern already knows and has come to the realization what the problem was. And even then, it's just, when was the realization? I guess she did realize that Neil needed help, but there wasn't a moment of reflection, I guess. She was just like, hey, Neil, so you can't do this? Here's a rope. Thumbs up. Was there a moment where she was like, hey, maybe this is what KB's problem was. She just couldn't do it and she needed help. It's not the greatest little arc there, and each individual arc is kind of like this. I do think this is the worst result of it, where I was watching it and being like, that doesn't really make much sense. That wasn't really written super well. I mean, I'm glad they try to add some sort of drama to them, but honestly, I think the child cast works best when they're just keeping the plot going and just working their way into the plot, and less having individual arcs. Because, I mean, they're kids. I don't think they really need it that much. I think the plot works better when it's not trying to be deeper than it already is. At least not with these characters. So those were the 4 kid characters. But next character, however, is SM33. Now, SM33 is the second best character from this show. I'll get into the first in a minute. So SM33 is the really crappy, rundown pirate droid that they find on the ancient ship. That he's still there. He's barely active. He's got a little rat living in his eye socket. But honestly, SM33, he's great. I absolutely love him. Star Wars just has an obligation where they just have to check off the really fun droid side character. So many examples of that. SM33 is once again checking off that box. And you know what? He's great. I love him in this. He's got the really kind of goofy pirate accent. He's kind of a murder machine when he wants to be. I say that because he does get shot pretty easily, twice, but they build him back, so he's okay, which is good, because it's scary when he's not here. And he's just, in general, he's just such a fun character. he doesn't have much depth, and he can get pretty, there is a point where his software kind of malfunctions, and he like turns on them, and he's actually kind of scary. Like, he works pretty well as a threat, but in general, he's just, when he's an ally, which is the majority of the show, he's just really fun. There's not much to him. He doesn't have an arc or anything. Yeah, he's just a fun little side character. He's got the pirate accent. He goes by the pirate's code. He's not the brightest. He easily just believes that Fern killed his captain. But yeah, he's great. I love him. There's really not much to him. He's just big highlight of the show. SM33 gets 2 thumbs up. Now, the last character I'll really go into, absolute highlight of this show, and that is Jude Law's character, and that's Jod, or Captain Silvo. And I think he's got a couple of names, but I don't really remember them. He is absolutely the highlight of the show, like, no question. SM33, he's great. I love SM33, but he is very much just a fun character. Like, he doesn't have much weight on the actual plot. Jod, however, is phenomenal. First things first, Jod is the pirate guy that the kids team up to find their way home. Jod is obviously a pretty sketchy guy. He lies to the kids multiple times. I do like the fact that they don't do like a big liars reveal episode towards the end of the show where all the kids were like, "You've been lying to us this entire time," and just make a super big deal out of it. I like that they don't do that because I think it's a trope, really annoys me. They get it out of the way pretty quick. Like, I think it's within like the first 10 minutes, the first episode, we really get to know Jod. They establish pretty early that he's lying to the kids. One of the crew members is like, "Hey, Captain Jod, how's it going?" And he's like, "Pretty good." So they get that out of the way pretty quick, and I'm glad they do, because it would have been an exhausting liars reveal, especially when we know, like, I like the show that doesn't treat us like we're stupid. Like, yeah, the guy in the opening is obviously the same dude. I know he's wearing a mask, but that's Jude Law's voice. I know it. That's him. Don't try to hide from me. But yeah, they get that out of the way pretty quick. Not only do we as the audience find out, but by the end of the episode, the kids also kind of find out that, yeah, he's lying. But they stick with him anyway because he's kind of like the best chance they got, well, at the moment. Actually, now that I think about it, they really had the opportunity to get away from Jod at the end of that episode, like, because the X-Wing pilots were there. I don't really know why they chose to stay with Jod, especially after finding out he was not really the greatest guy to be with. But I guess I could chalk that up to, like, in the heat of the moment, and they just decided to go with him because, you know, yeah, things were going down. They just kind of went that direction. But anyway, so yeah, first things first, Jod is pretty much established to be a pretty sketchy guy, and he's also a Force wielder. Yeah, so when he first meets the kids, he pretends to be a Jedi, and he's not. He's just a Force user, but he's also a pirate, which is pretty cool. I mean, I don't think they really do much with the fact that he's a Force user towards the end of the show. The only part where it really matters in the plot is that, you know, he claims to be a Jedi, and he's got proof because he can use the Force. But other than that, it doesn't really have much weight on the actual plot, which is a little disappointing. I think that could have been fleshed out a little bit better, but I'm willing to forgive it because Force Pirate is still just kind of a fun idea. I like that. Jod, he's just overall, for the first half of the show, he's just a fun little side character. It's very obvious that he's, you know, reluctant to help the kids. Like, he's helping the kids because he wants to get to the gold. But, you know, you see him slowly kind of establish a relationship with the kids. You know, he's starting to get along with them. We see him, you know, help free them from the whole apocalyptic clan thing. He helps them free that. You know, they all give him a hug and everything. And then, you know, when Wim is sad, he, like, tries to help him out. He doesn't help him out very well, but he tries to help him out, you know? It's like, yeah, through this entire ride, like, he's obviously, you know, still a sketchy guy. He's got a pretty sketchy past, and he's still very much a criminal, but you still think he's legit just trying to help these kids out, you know, for the sake of growing an attachment for it. So I was really thinking by the end of the show, it was going to be like, yeah, I was originally doing it for money, but you know what? I like you guys. I'm just gonna help you get there, and then I'm gonna drop you off, and it's gonna be a good day. But no, and I feel so duped. I feel bamboozled. And the funny thing is because the show spells it out for you the entire time. So many characters in the show tell the main cast that, hey, Jod is an extremely sketchy guy. You should not be hanging out with him. Do not trust him. And then they stick with him anyway. So every time a character says that to like the main cast, and they're like, nah, he's gotten us this far, like, we're gonna stick with him. The show tells us, the audience, that we shouldn't trust this guy, that he is sketchy, he will stab you in the back, and you shouldn't trust him. But I'm like, but he's getting along with the kids, and you know, he's got a little bit of a heart. He's not gonna do anything crazy. It's gonna be a kind of a heartwarming story of how he warms up to him and just kind of helps him out in the end. They played me like a fiddle. Jod betrays them, and let me tell you, even though it's literally been spelled out this entire show, I felt so stupid because I did not think this is how it was gonna go. Even though they told you so many times that you shouldn't trust this guy, I trusted him anyway. Then he betrays them. It kind of hurt. And then you get to see Jod's true colors. Like, before, he was obviously like a little bit of a schemer, but up until this point, you know, he was still a kind of a generally friendly guy. Like, he was still, you know, nice to the kids, even though he was kind of annoyed with their hijinks. He still stuck with them, and like I say, you felt like there was an attachment growing between them. But no, not only is Jod's betrayal a little unexpected, well, kind of expected. Like I said, the show just doesn't. The show does kind of spell it out for you, but unexpected for me. But not only is it that, but it's also a pretty tense betrayal. Like, it kind of came at a point I wasn't expecting it to, and Jod it's like the switch flicks immediately. He immediately turns to like a pretty menacing threat, and you're just like, whoa, where did this come from? And he stays like that for the entire rest of the show. Like, he goes from like helping the kids out, being like one of the main, you know, supporting cast, to straight up the main villain of the show. And he's great in both roles. Like, he's just a fun kind of character to help them on their journey in the first half, but then in the second half, he is like an actual menace. He is a big threat to these kids, and he threatens them multiple times. He threatens their lives. He threatens their parents' lives. He wants to basically enslave this entire planet. Like, it's like, holy smokes. I did not expect Jod to be this evil, and he is. And it doesn't feel forced in the slightest. His betrayal, I think, is perfect, because they set it up so well, but they still expect you to, you know, kind of go with the classic bad guy turning good to help the kids out. Is that a trope? I feel like it's a trope. But you feel like they're gonna go that way. And instead, you know, Jod straight betrays them. And then, yeah, he's just a menace. He is a straight up villain. And I love him when he turns to a villain too. I loved him before, but now I love him as a villain as well, because he is a genuine threat. Every scene, it's just him and the other characters like alone in a room. He like dominates the room. He makes his presence known, and he is a big threat. He's generally, I think, one of the better Star Wars villains we've had in a minute. Obviously, Star Wars has like plenty of amazing villains, and he's definitely not like one of the best by any means. But for like a one-off spin-off show that's basically Goonies in space, Jod does not need as much depth as he does, I think, and he does not need to be executed as well as he does, but they do. And he is great in this. Jod, I think, might be the highlight of the show for me, because I think he is by far the most well-written character. And you know what? His demise, I think, is actually, well, you don't see him like die or anything. You just assume he gets arrested, and that just happens off screen. The show ends before that really gets to that. But like, the way that they counter his plan, I think also just actually makes a lot of sense. Like, it's not just some straight up stupid maneuvers that they get it. like what the kids end up doing, it's not like a, wow, they just made Jod like a laughing stock. Like, I think it actually works mostly pretty well. Like, it's actually, I think, a pretty good finale. I was expecting the finale for this show to be kind of garbage. Like, I got to episode, I think, 7. I think it has 8 episodes. Hey, this show's been pretty good so far. I kind of don't feel like the finale is going to be very good. The build-up was really good, but I was like, I don't know. I feel like the finale is going to be kind of lackluster, especially considering the finale, they're actually on their main planet. It's like the journey's been complete, but now they just have to deal with Jod. And it's actually really good. Like, I was pretty impressed by how good the finale was. It's definitely better than most Star Wars shows, I'd say, for the most part. Obviously, not the best Star Wars finale. Star Wars Clone Wars still has my favorite finale of any show of all time. But I genuinely thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Now, there are, I guess you could say, some other characters. The parents of the kids kind of have their own subplot. They, especially Wim's dad and Fern's mom, they actually do play a kind of a bigger role towards the end here. But the parents subplot is not particularly interesting. It's not bad, but they don't focus on it that much. So it is what it is. I don't really care that much about it, but it's here, and it's okay. I don't really have much to say about it. He's far from a main character, but I'll admit, like, the supervisor character, like, I was expecting the supervisor to be sketchier, something a little darker. I could use, like, for a second, I was even expecting maybe the supervisor to team up with Jod. I mean, the supervisor hadn't been built up to at all to do that. I don't know why I was expecting that, but I was kind of expecting the supervisor to be pretty evil. But no, he's just this robot guy just chilling up there, and Jod just killed him. Like, he's barely in this, which I think a supervisor for this suburban planet that's been just completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy would have just a little bit more depth. But all in all, I do really like the cast. The 4 kids are very likable. They work very well. SM33 is the GOAT. I love my boy SM33. And Jod, chef's kiss. Phenomenal as, like, a character that's just helping him out for the first half. And then really phenomenal, I think, as the villain. Jude Law, I think, absolutely understood the assignment, and he did a great job. So all in all, very good from the main cast completely. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the show conceptually, or less conceptually and more just the concepts that this show has, because this show, I think, is pretty creative. I mean, even though it's based off the Goonies or whatever, the whole, like, treasure hunting plot, the fact that hasn't been done before in Star Wars, I think is kind of shocking. Like, I think an Indiana Jones or a Uncharted would work super well in this universe. I probably would have preferred this show to copy either of those instead of the Goonies. I do like those more. But I think the treasure hunting plot is still really fun in this show, and it works pretty well. And also, just in general, obviously a big complaint that so many people have had about the recent Star Wars shows, that they require so much cameo power, so much, like, hey, guy, point and look at it, be like, holy smokes, that's cool. Skeleton Crew does not have that. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think Skeleton Crew has a single character that's shown up in a previous Star Wars thing at all, which even Andor, which felt completely separate from most of the Star Wars stuff, it still had that. So Skeleton Crew is working on its own, and I think the show works perfectly fine. No Luke Skywalker comes to save them at the end or anything. It's just regular X-Wing pilots. And, I think the show works pretty well. It's not super Star Wars-y. I mean, I think the vibe, like I said, the adventure, imaginative, yeah, that vibe of Star Wars is still absolutely here. But, like, we don't see any stormtroopers. We barely even see the New Republic in this. So it works pretty separate from everything else in the Star Wars universe, and it still works really well. But, so one of the bigger plot twists, the whole plot twist that at Aden, the planet that they were on, was completely separate from the rest of the galaxy, I think that's a fun idea. I don't think we've seen that in Star Wars before, at least I haven't. And that's a pretty interesting idea about just a whole planet that's just completely cut off. Like, these kids, they don't know anything that's been happening. They do not know that Alderaan has blown up. They do not know about the Empire. They do not know about the Rebellion. They know nothing. They don't know about Order 66. It's like, that's kind of a fun idea. Just to have this planet that has been just completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. And it's like when they finally shoot out of it and they're trying to get home, their planet is just a myth. Like, they ask so many people, it was like, hey, how do we get back to At-Aten? And they're like, what? At-Aten? So here's another thing. At-Aten in the Star Wars universe, it's basically Treasure Planet, or Treasure Island, whichever one you think. So At-Aten is basically just a myth, especially amongst pirates. It's got just unfathomable, just a lot of money there, a lot of treasure. And so all the pirates want to find it, but obviously they have no idea where it is or where to go, because it's been hidden from the rest of the galaxy. And you know what? That's just a fun idea. And to make it so that's where the planet that the kids come from, like, they don't even know that their planet is just a myth to the rest of the galaxy. I don't know. I think that was a fun little creative twist, not one I was expecting. Because I was like, hey, they're trying to get back home. That's cool. But I feel like in the Star Wars universe, that wouldn't be that difficult. But it was like, oh no, your planet's a myth. Okay, now it's difficult. Now I understand why this has to go for a whole season. And yeah, it's just a fun little twist I like a lot, and I think it works. This is just a fun idea. This show's got plenty of those. It's got a lot of fun ideas. Pirate Jedi? Sure. Why not? That's cool. Just a little spaceport that's just a bunch of pirates. Skull Island in space here? That's cool. Why not do that? That's a fun little idea. Having a planet that's basically just that's just completely run down. It's apocalyptic. It's just got two rival clans just going at each other at all times. Why not? That's fun. And just, you know, I like the variety. I'm so sick of Star Wars having just a bunch of sand planets. We've seen Tatooine so many times. Say what you will about the prequels, but they had a lot of really fun and creative planet ideas, I think, to mix it up. Like Coruscant, Felucia, Camino, Mustafar, Utapau, like, so many, like, really fun planet ideas, and we haven't really seen those planets return, which they don't return in this one either, but this one still has a lot of good ideas. Like, I don't know why, but having a moon that actually just legit looks like a moon kind of was, like, blowing my mind. I was like, no way, that's pretty cool. We haven't really seen that in Star Wars yet, just an actual just moon that looks like a moon. Like, that's cool. I mean, like I said, At-Aten as a concept, I think was really cool. And I remember a lot of people complaining when the show's, like, first trailer dropped, why it looked so suburban, it looked too normal. But I think given the twist that happens, yeah, I think it makes it a little bit more justified. And yeah, also, apocalyptic planet. Cool. just so many fun ideas just crammed in this show. It's just genuinely more creative than so many other of these Star Wars shows that we've been getting. This show's got a lot of fun concepts and ideas, and I love the fact that the show didn't feel the need to be just permanently attached so strongly to the Star Wars brand. So yeah, I just really appreciate that. Oh, and SM-33 as a character is also just a fun concept, I think. Oh, and that owl lady that charts stars that lives on that moon. That's also a cool idea. Oh, and I guess the spa place with a giant or pirate's lair underneath the luxurious, spa place. Yeah, that was also fun. Yeah, this is a fun show. I like this show. Last thing I promised before I finally wrap things up is the look and sound of this Star Wars show. So, Star Wars shows as of lately, I'm mainly looking at, like, Obi-Wan Kenobi, like, Mandalorian Season 3, like, Book of Boba. Something just feels so cheap about them. I'm not really sure why. I think it's the lighting. I think it might be the lighting. Like, the sets just look overly bright, or they just look extremely simplistic. Book of Boba, I don't know why, it it just looked overly lit the entire time when they were in Tatooine. It just kind of looked bad. Or Obi-Wan Kenobi, every time they were in a set, it just looked like it was just one room. It just looked extremely cheap, and just the way that they were shot also just wasn't very creative. Now, Skeleton Crew does, I think, look pretty good, especially the CGI. Like, this show, I think the CGI looks pretty good, especially compared to, like, the Star Wars shows that I just mentioned. But also, I do think it is filmed much better. I did look up, like, it is advertised, and I guess I just didn't pay attention to it, but I did look up the fact that who directed, like, or who had a big hand in the directing of the show, and it was the guy who did the Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy. And I was like, hey, maybe that's why it feels a little bit more refined at times, a little more well shot, well directed. It does feel less cheap than those other Star Wars shows. I don't know why in the world Skeleton Crew feels less cheap than Obi-Wan Kenobi or Boba Fett, but it is true. I really like the look of this. It's definitely not as well shot as like Andor is, that's still top tier cinematography, but the show is, I think, pretty good looking for the most part, and it does have some really creative shots. I remember there's this one shot in particular, the plane or the ship flying up, and it flies through like the smoke or whatever that the barrier does, and the ship just flies through it, and I was just like, dang, that looks pretty good. I like the look of that. And this show's got a few of those where it's just like, hey, that's a nice shot. I like that. So just in general, the cinematography and the actual CGI, especially in like that last episode, like the ginormous pirate ship just looming down on like the Aten, I just think looks really good. It looks pretty solid. So look wise, I think the show it passes the check. I think it works pretty well. It's not the best we've seen from Star Wars, but I do think for the most part it is pretty good. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the sound, more specifically just music. Probably the only consistently good thing about Star Wars is the music. I mean, even the sequel trilogy, as questionable as some of its writing decisions were, John Williams still went kind of crazy on there. Rey's theme is almost iconic at this point. Rey's theme is really good. But even that has been kind of lacking, lately. Even when the bad Star Wars shows, are bad, like Book of Boba, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, those still had really good, I think, scores that were attached to it. Like Book of Boba Fett might have been a pretty crappy show, but it did have that super good theme, the drums and the tribal chanting to reflect Boba Fett's time with the Tusken Raiders. Like, it's really good. Or Obi-Wan Kenobi, which was written by John Williams himself. He came back for that show, and it's just so good. But even recently, even the Acolyte, which was bad, I don't even remember the Acolyte's main theme. I remember the main theme from every Star Wars show except for the Acolyte. Not even Acolyte could have good music going for it. Maybe it was good, and I just don't remember it, but considering I remember every other Star Wars show's main theme, I feel like I would have remembered it. But Skeleton Crew, I do think. I remember Skeleton Crew's main theme. It's a little bit more relaxed, but still also kind of whimsical, which I think fits the show really well. It's kind of a casual watch kind of show, but, having the whimsical vibe to the theme, I think also reflects kind of the more adventure side of the show, and I think it works pretty well. So, yeah, that kind of a quick little category here, but I think the show sounds pretty good. I think the music is pretty good, and I think the show looks pretty good too. So, good stuff all around. In conclusion, I think Skeleton Crew is pretty good. It's got a lot of fun characters, fun concepts, ideas, a really, really great villain. Like I said, such a partially my enjoyment of this show is, I do think a lot of it is just contributed to the fact that so many Star Wars shows suck and that this one was good. So I just had a good time. But the more I talk about it, the more I genuinely really like it. I think I was originally thinking if I had to score it, I think I was originally thinking a 7. But the more I talk about it, I think I'm more leaning on an 8. It's definitely got its flaws, and even though it has a lot of fun ideas, I wouldn't say any of its ideas are particularly, like, risky. I'd say, like, it plays it pretty safe for the most part, which is fine. This show didn't really need to do anything wild to just be a really enjoyable experience, but it very much is. It's kind of a shame. I think this is the Star Wars show that's been doing the absolute worst, and, like, I can't blame it. It's, like I said, for pretty much all the reasons I said in the intro, you know, between so many Star Wars shows being complete garbage and just in general, I don't think that many people wanted to see a Star Wars version of Goonies. Like, I don't think that was really on their wish list. And especially after shows like, I don't know, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett were kind of garbage. So, like, Space Goonies was going to be good. Nah, that's not going to happen. Well, it did happen. It is a shame that this is, like, the worst performing Star Wars show. I don't think it's really going to recover. I think if it doesn't peak when it comes out, then it's not going to get much attention. But, like, if you were a Star Wars fan and just kind of pass this one up, I highly recommend it. I think you'd enjoy it quite a lot. If you're not really a Star Wars fan in general, I'm not sure how much you'd enjoy this show. I think I'm feeling more like an 8 out of it. I feel like a non-Star Wars fan would probably feel more like a 7. Like, it doesn't do anything particularly wild, and I think that's why. But in general, I just really love it. I think it is a super fun show. And it's not one I'm going to be singing its praises as much as something like Andor. That is still peak Star Wars television. Andor is phenomenal. 10 out of 10. That is one I will recommend to everybody. Andor is so good. Go watch Andor. But Skeleton Crew is also pretty good. I do enjoy it quite a lot. And for the most part, I see most people have really enjoyed it too. It hasn't had that many people talk about it, obviously, like I said before, but the few people that have talked about it seem to have really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that they did. It's just a fun little experience, and I recommend it for the most part. It's obviously not perfect, but I think it absolutely accomplishes what it means to do. So that's Skeleton Crew. I think 8 out of 10 show, very good. It's about really all I have to say. Thank you for watching. Also, I made this meme. Okay, now bye.